Well, welcome to my panelists here. We have an esteemed group of thought leaders from around our industry. Really excited for the conversation we're about to have here regarding fiber and the incredible opportunity ahead of us, specifically in how AI and cloud are really forcing us to rethink how we support the incredible growth that we're seeing. Look, as we heard yesterday, I'm sure many of you were in those sessions, AI is really transforming our industry across the board. There were a few themes we heard yesterday. We've only just begun. Digital infrastructure is at the heartbeat of it all. And as we heard yesterday, the race for power is on across the board. Power and that shortfall of power is really forcing us as infrastructure providers, data center providers specifically, to go look at alternative energies, but also alternative markets for where we can build the next gen data centers to support those AI workloads and the expansion globally. But what we're running into is our secondary challenge, right? Which is to connect in the data centers, between the data centers, to the metros and to the depths down, even down to the hospital beds, the manufacturing floors, the retail stores that will connect those very applications and inferences that leverage AI as we move forward. So I would love to open up. Maybe Steve, you could start us out. You have an incredible background, both network, hosting, data centers, investment banking. Tell us a little bit about the macro trends you're seeing with AI and cloud, and what that's forcing us to do from a fiber and a network perspective.
Geez, investment banking, when did I get that experience? You sure you don't want to start with Gary or my other colleague there? Well, we're all experiencing the same big macro trends, which is pretty exciting. The way we think about it from a Zayo perspective is everything that's going on now seems like the beginning of what we saw 12 years ago with cloud. We're at the hype cycle, so all these new trends require a lot of data center capacity and a lot of delivery mechanisms. And so what Dave and our two companies are part of that delivery. All this stuff's got to get put on the manufacturing floor. It's got to get put in enterprises. It's got to get put in airports. It's got to get put everywhere. And I find the time now as exciting as I saw 12, 13 years ago when cloud was unfolding. Everybody was worried about the hype cycle and is it going to. And I think the issues are different now. But the macro trends are feeding all of us. Gary's business works with both of our businesses, and it's the demand is incredible. There's lots of questions and concerns about all the capital that's going into the ground. Where's the revenue going to come from? Are the returns going to be there? And I'm very optimistic about all this because I think the funniest question I've been asked, and I'm sure these guys get asked too, is could this be like 25 years ago when the .com blew up? Right. Well, I don't think it's anywhere near that because of the maturity of the industry. We're not dealing with startups anymore. We're dealing with mature companies. And I think it's exciting. And I think the job we're going to have to do and all the rest of the companies you've had in here yesterday and the day before are living in a time that is exponential. And it's going to be exciting for all of us.
Such a good point. Now, how do you see in terms of the power, and where we're going to build those data centers and what that really means to how we rethink network?
Well, as I'm sure you heard yesterday on the panel, the training deployments, the power, they're going to where the power sources are. I think we all believe as that matures, when the inference starts to take place with AI, it'll come back to the big metros. But the connectivity required to accommodate all this is going to be enormous. I think a lot of the older routes are maturing. For example, in our company, we probably added 12,000 route miles last year ahead of this to accommodate what we see is coming. We're very in tune now with where all the concentration points are going to be for the next wave of cloud and AI as it continues to fall out. We just made an announcement today for 5,000 more route miles of, we're going to overpull, we're going to build new routes. Since I've been there, the 4.5 years I've been there, we've done 15 or so huge long-haul routes to accommodate all this. There's a dozen more in motion today. I think we're one of the few companies building these massive long-haul routes. These are 2 to 3 year projects. The big ones take close to $100 million of capital. So we talk about this frequently. Capital allocation is going to be important. Discipline is going to be important. Supply chain is going to be important. So all the things that we manage every day are going to be super important that we stay disciplined.
Oh, for sure. Dave, you, by the way, congratulations 2 years ago for your acquisition of the T-Mobile and Sprint backbone, complementing the Cogent network in an incredible way. That was great foresight by you, but also such an incredible way to put you in a strong position to, again, also help provide that connectivity. How do you view where the market's going? What are the changes we should be looking forward to?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things going on concurrently. The first is the deployment of AI. It is real, it is impacting all of our lives, and it is just beginning. It is not clear that there is a business model associated with AI at this point, but I actually agree with Steve's point. The companies that are funding that infrastructure deployment have strong balance sheets and very strong operating businesses. So the $2 trillion of announced capital deployment, $1 trillion over 25 and 26, and over the next 5 years, there's been a total of $2 trillion announced, will get deployed, and it will not bankrupt those companies, as we experienced in the dot-com boom. To the point about where that demand is coming from, we operate in a world where power construction takes a very long time. Both generation and transmission each have about a 10-year lead time in the developed world. For the past 60 years, the world has basically operated in balance, where there's about 2% GDP growth in OECD countries, about 1% improvement in efficiency of networks, electrical networks, and therefore about a 1% increase in power. And the world was relatively in balance till data centers came along, traditional, conventional, cloud-based data centers, and they mopped up about 2% of the excess power in the OECD grids. And the system sustained that. But now we have an incremental application that is even more power intensive. And that application, AI training, is not possible with the current power in the locations where that existing data sits. So what is happening is companies that are looking to implement these large data centers for the sole purpose of training are locating in very remote areas. They typically have 4 criteria. They want land, they want water for cooling, they have to have access to power, and ideally they'll get some kind of subsidy from the local government to incite them to build in that particular location. And with that, we have this huge disconnect that's occurred between where the compute exists and where the data exists. AI is possible because of the huge amounts of data that were collected over the internet. There's roughly 800 zettabytes of stored information in the world today. That information is the raw material for training. However, the CPU or GPU processing to do that can't sit where the data is. So it's creating this tremendous demand for transport networks that Steve's company, Gary's company, and our company benefit from.
Right, and I believe that what I saw was 850 terawatt hours by 2030 in terms of global data center consumption for power. And that's all being driven on by these AI models. And in those secondary and tertiary markets, for example, in the US, Louisiana, Texas, Iowa, Montana, where we don't typically have fiber.
Dense fiber.
Readily dense, next-gen, high-performant fiber. Gary, what are you seeing as part of Ciena and how you're supporting operators on these significant builds?
So, listen, I very much agree with sort of Dave's sort of summary of the dynamics. About half our business, is hyperscalers directly or indirectly, and the rest is service provider. And obviously, you're seeing a blurring there as well, where you've got, service providers doing specialized builds for, the hyperscalers. What we're seeing is, a significant uptick. We're very exposed into the cloud market with all of the major hyperscalers, and we're absolutely seeing a big uptick in cloud traffic. It's difficult to discern how much of that is actually AI, because you think most of the training actually stays within the US or the various countries because of the sovereignty issues. I don't think we've even seen the start of that, really. I really don't think we have. And if you think about the sort of hierarchy of flow here, you've got sort of $2 trillion going into all the GPU stuff, which has obviously been the predominant focus to date. That's now transferred to the whole power issue, and you're seeing massive investments in power. And then, of course, there's this thing called the network. And I think we are beginning to see the first signs of that investment focus cascading through. And having lived through 2001 with all the scars of it and are suitably paranoid around the whole thing, I actually feel, and this might be a little controversial, I think we are actually underestimating the amount of capacity that's going to be required to deliver this stuff. I absolutely do.
Well, it would seem that way, right? Because if you look at just where we're at in terms of our ability or inability to accurately forecast just power, think about what that means in terms of micro levels for fiber, for routing, for paths, for capacity, et cetera. So what that means, though, is how in the world do you fund and invest and finance that? What are some of the new, we've got to also get more creative in how we're investing and the financial models and the business models around it. Maybe Radhika, you could give us some perspective on what you're seeing from an investor perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. Pleasure to be here. I agree with everything that I've heard so far. I think from our perspective, we have focused a lot on what we would call as picks and shovels business, as opposed to the software side. I've been looking for the last 3 years at what the software investments have been, and initially it started as software because of the LLMs, but I don't think anybody quite anticipated that in just 1 year after ChatGPT, there would be over 1 million LLM models out there, and the cost of that would just come down dramatically, right? It came down dramatically. But still the open question is, do we need trillion parameter models? And are we really going to achieve AGI or not? That's an open question. I don't think anybody questions the value of AI. People are already starting to see in marketing, in chat, in back office, in legal applications. So people are starting to explore AI in the enterprise, but the enterprise is nowhere close to anything that the hyperscalers are doing. So we're seeing like a tale of two cities. All of the money is off the balance sheet of the 5 or 6 big players, and we haven't started to see any enterprise spend. So we're looking at it from real estate perspective. We're looking at land under tower, fiber, land, pre-construction, and so on and so forth. So we'll play on the debt side, we'll play on the equity side. We will even take some mezzanine financing positions, all on the infrastructure. On the other side, from a private equity, which is where I am part of, we look at some 43 major components we have identified, from high voltage transformers all the way into chiplet technology inside of the data center. So we've been making investments inside the data center, kind of following NVIDIA path of what all is needed to make it more efficient. And then outside, we've been looking at everything from energy storage to transformers, power generators, UPS. We don't quite do HVAC, but pretty much everything along the value chain we look at from an investment perspective.
That's fascinating. So you've now gone from what was digital infrastructure being data centers, maybe network, to being everything backwards in the value chain, just about, excluding HVAC, all the way forward to, right, apps and models. Steve, what is your perspective? You are doing these significant builds right now. Are you approaching them differently from a financial view and an investment return on capital?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we all are. I mean, as I mentioned, I think we're all going to get super disciplined about capital allocation and how we look at returns. But to the points that Gary and Dave made and to the investment cycles, I personally haven't been around, not as long as Dave, but I've been in this industry a long time. I think the world, the market, however you want to point to, is going to solve this power thing we're all talking about. So the amount of money going into nuclear, the amount of money going into, I mean, we even have natural gas chairmen and CEOs coming to data center CEOs today saying, hey, I have a pipeline in 15 states in the middle of the country. I understand you guys are facing this power constraint. How can I help you? So I do think natural gas is going to be a short-term winner. And I think AI is going to be in everything. It's going to improve every app that we deal with in the world. I don't think there'll be an app that won't be improved by AI. And so I think we have to pay attention to what's happening now and we'll figure out how to solve the power, and then the training deployments will get done. We'll have to get them connected. We're very selective, I'm sure Dave is too, about how many of those places we're going to go to the middle of North Dakota or the middle of some state where there's not a lot of demand outside of that hyperscaler. But listen, we follow the hyperscalers, we follow the carriers, we follow the data center providers. They're the smartest people in the middle of this infrastructure ecosystem. It's like Jeff Bezos used to say, you got to watch where your customers are going and figure out how to beat them there. And so most of the things we do at Zayo now, we're trying to softwareize everything in the network. I think Dave agrees with me that all of this, last decade, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, network's going to be served up as a service. There's a lot of companies that call themselves NaaS companies today. We're accommodating it to a degree. But I think the next generation, we're going to have to figure out how to make it really easy to order and provision within minutes and deliver within days to improve our mean time to install. I think the world is going there. I think NaaS is going to get to the next level. For people like us, Gary's company will help us optically with all the software and all the hardware required to go do this. And it'll get resolved. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I mean, it's the last thing I'd say. I read this somewhere. I mean, Dave, you've probably seen this. That over the last 10 to 12 years, there was some order of magnitude of $5 trillion spent to release the public cloud. $5 trillion.
It's amazing.
So Dave mentioned a couple of trillion here and there. I think it'll be in the $6 to $7 trillion to make AI come real over the next decade, somewhere in that order of magnitude. So the amount of compute and connectivity required to accommodate this makes us and everybody else in this room that's in this space, we're going to be busy for a decade.
Right.
And it's going to be exciting. There'll be winners. There'll probably be some losers. But if people are disciplined in how they run their business and make good decisions, I think there's an opportunity here for exciting times ahead. I couldn't agree more. Definitely an opportunity of a lifetime that we're all seeing here. Gary, I hear automation. I hear SDN and some of the things that Steve was describing. How do you see us really tackling that as an industry? How do we get better at doing real-time provisioning, even smart networks?
Well, listen, I mean, I think as an industry, we've struggled with this for a long time, right? Because we've seen what the hyperscalers have been able to do because they have a green field, they can take the best technology and custom design it, et cetera. Unfortunately, the telco space, we have a lot of legacy, a lot of regulations, and all the rest of it. So, it's led to systems that, are operating that are, sometimes decades old. But I think there's a sort of tipping point now, a forcing function amongst all the sort of major service providers that they've got to really get their back office automated. And we're seeing that with things like Blue Planet automation, which has been out for a while, and we're now seeing a significant uptick around that automation because a lot of the systems they've got are actually getting into obsolescence. And it's cost, it's economics. If they can't, you can't, AI something if you don't know what you got. You don't know what your inventory is. Right. And, the candid fact is that, most major carriers around the world don't actually know what inventory they've got. They don't know what they've got in terms of their... Why are you looking at me? I'm not looking at you.
Right.
I was not particularly looking at you, Steve. I would say that about every major carrier in the world. And so, the first point of it, you've got to understand what you've got before you can apply any automation to it. So we are seeing, a significant uptick in that kind of activity.
It's very important. AI needs data more than data needs AI.
Right.
And Gary couldn't be more correct.
But the other thing about telcos is they also need to bring all of their data together. They're operated in silos, and that's one of the challenges for AI. Generative AI does not like silos. It likes all of the data. So I think that's sort of going to push carriers and others to bring it together.
And if you think about it, most of the carriers around the world are a result of multiple acquisitions.
Exactly.
So, you've got to integrate them.
Disparate systems, disparate platforms, disparate cultures, right? Dave, what are you seeing in terms of, I know supporting that kind of growth and the integration and kind of the challenge around automation. I know you're faced with that now as you're integrating your two companies. Can you speak to some of the exciting things you're doing?
Yeah, so let's start with services. There is no network that is more efficient than the public internet. That was not what people initially expected, but the internet is more ubiquitous, it is easier to use, and most importantly, it's the lowest cost per bit mile of transport. And it's really that network that has powered all of this innovation. It's created that data that is the raw material for training. Now, with the acquisition of the Sprint network from T-Mobile, we acquired really three things simultaneously. One, we acquired an enterprise customer base buying legacy VPN and internet services on a global basis. That was not Cogent's target market. It had virtually no traffic compared to our traffic volume, less than 0.9 of 1% of the total Sprint traffic equaled Cogent. So, we had to absorb that into our network. The second thing we acquired was actually a money-losing business. It was burning $1 million a day. And that's a problem. We were paid by T-Mobile to take that asset and fix it. And it is hard work. It's customer by customer, product by product to fix it. And we are working our way through it. And really the crown jewel in what we acquired was a network that was built for a totally different purpose and was almost completely obsolete. It was a TDM voice network built at a capital cost of $20.5 billion between 1982 and 1991. And that network was not really used for the services that Sprint was selling. In fact, 93% of the revenues never touched the Sprint network. They were resale of some other services. And what we had to do is reconfigure that network into something that is viable. And that reconfiguration is selling optical transport services. We had to take the switch sites and convert them to data centers, and we had to expand our internet connectivity. We have a very narrow business model, and in our case, knowing what not to do is as important as knowing what to do. Gary kind of mentioned, legacy services. You have companies that have evolved over a 100-year period, and anyone who's in the telecommunications business knows it's easy to create a product and hard to kill it. They just continue. So when the new technology comes along and you want to add a more efficient network architecture, you do it, but all of the predecessor network architectures remain. So now your network management problem got exponentially harder. And we were fortunate in that we were able to kill a number of those products and not have to deal with those issues.
Which speaks, Gary, to your point on the headache from a legacy perspective, and Steve, yours as well, right? And through acquisition, which is really what our industry has been through for the last, 30 years. It's going to force us to change. So that forcing of change, right, that requires top talent across power, network, AI and data, business models. How are you seeing that being a critical success factor, and what should we be looking at as an industry to attract more talent into digital infrastructure? Steve, we'll start with you.
To attract more talent. Well, you have to have a culture that people want to be part of. That's a growth culture and an exciting place to be. And I think to Dave's point, some of these old business models were,
Right.
I think connectivity was looked at as a commodity for a long time. I think Dave and Gary would agree, it's not a commodity anymore. And
Right.
so the requirement for what we do for a living is required. So, all three of us have done this. We've built great cultures. You attract people. You give them opportunities. I do think the innovation now required for this next wave is going to propel all of us to think out of the box and think. And I think innovative cultures attract people that want to do big things.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, and I mentioned one thing before. I think, we're trying to move our Waves platform. Dave does the same thing. Our lit services to easier to consume.
Mm-hmm.
Generally in our culture, we're trying to follow what Bezos did when he created Amazon. There was an easy button there.
Right.
You hit a button, a lot of cool things happen. So there's a lot of work to do to get to that state of investment that they did. But we're trying to make how you consume our company for all of our customers, we have 7,500 of them, really easy to consume us. And so there's a lot of work, and that's exciting work for people to come in and help. And it's going to get more software enabled. There's no question. We haven't done a great job in this industry being software enabled, and I think it's coming, as Radhika said. So that's exciting, and people want to be part of that.
Right.
And if you're winning and you're growing, I came into a company that grew through inorganic, and Dave knew it better than I did. 46 acquisitions, it's 50 now, and it grew through buying companies every year.
Right.
And my mission was turned into an organic growth machine. Well, we're there now, but it took a couple of hard years. In the last 2 years, we're growing organically. That's a lot more fun. And you guys know, when you're growing organically, you can get people excited about it. You enjoy it more. It's not as much of a grind. So it's those kinds of things where people get excited.
Excellent. Radhika, what are your thoughts on that? Look at the industry.
Look, I think in this particular time and moment, it's not just a few people writing some lines of code and dispatching it out there. I think all of a sudden you're seeing people who need to be electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, substrates, rare earth materials. People are trying to invent new materials because things in the data center need heat capacities that were never imagined. So I think the excitement is that everybody can participate in the AI economy simultaneously, and some amount has to be through training. I'm seeing universities and even College of Engineering start to think about how to go horizontal across their disciplines, because people like to say, bring AI to my department, versus saying, how can we all do AI together? I think that approach needs to happen in enterprises, needs to happen in schools, needs to be happening everywhere. And 2 to 4 week training should be mandatory for every employee in order to truly start participating in this wave.
Absolutely. Gary, what are your thoughts?
Listen, I mean, businesses are all about people. They really, really are. And, I think we're fortunate, as Steve said, we're moving from an industry that frankly, wasn't the most exciting in the world. Let's be brutally honest, right? I mean, it's, was regulated heavily, just really about sort of connectivity as a commodity, as you said. That is now shifting. We're actually becoming, super important, super critical, and it's a growth opportunity. So I think we're able to attract, a more innovative set of folks, and we have a massive Ciena early in career, program, and that's gone super well because people are now attracted, I think, to our space. Because at the end of the day, we're a super technology company, but who makes the technology? It's people, right? I mean, you can have the best technology in the world, but to continue to evolve that technology, you got to have the best people, and they got to play as a team. And I think, culture's a really big word. I struggle with it a little bit. It's really about behaviors and how do people behave to each other in their team and their partners and their ecosystem and the rest of it. And a consistency around that, I think, is super important. And, that's what really creates value in businesses, is getting the right people playing in the right way.
Before you get Dave's input on that, you caused me to think of something. Maybe this event, and Dave and Gary and I, we were out at dinners every night. We have, it's speed dating. We have hundreds of meetings. The reason I still come to this is you see the people that created this industry that are, were here yesterday, they're over here today, they're in a different company, they're all still around. Yeah. And it's exciting to see the folks still doing creative things in different companies with each other. And I think if people that weren't in this industry watched how people behaved at this event and saw the interaction going on here on behalf of everything we're talking about, they'd be blown away. Right. This is an incredible ecosystem of really smart people who have moved all around that are creating value for the next generation that's remarkable.
Oh, and what I love what you're saying is PTC has always been a very collaborative, even when it was the smallest of small events. What I've noticed for folks coming in, I've been blessed to be here for 23 years. I'm watching every one of you. So thank you for being on this panel with me through my career.
It helps that it's in Honolulu.
Right, it does help, yes. But isn't it fascinating, though, that collaboration, both literally in what we do as service providers, is critical for that interconnect. You can't be an island, but it's also what we do as people with each other. So I love that. Thank you, Steve. Dave, what are your thoughts on that front?
Yeah, on innovation, anyone who's worked at a legacy telecom company knows that they are not fun places to be.
No, for the ones that are in our audience.
You know, there are companies that have shrinking revenue and margin compression. So typically, management's response to that is twofold. One, to cut costs, which makes an unpleasant environment and actually dampens innovation. And then two, get out of the business they're in and get into some other business. And we've seen that with many telecom companies that often fail in their M&A strategy, where they're trying to become something they are not. We are in the connectivity industry. That is what we do. And we need to be the best at it. What we produce are interface-routed bit miles connected to other networks. Now, the internet is the most common of those networks, but there are private networks that also perform similar functions. And the innovation comes from driving down the cost of that production and spreading the ubiquity of those that use it. We have copper plant that's 125 years old. And in the developed world, we got to 95 to 97% penetration in that plant. But it turned out to be inadequate for this next generation of services. Coax filled a gap, mostly in the US, but some in Europe, where by dumb luck, the HFC plant had more bandwidth capabilities. Even though it was a shared medium, a party line, it became the de facto broadband pipe for most consumers. Now we're at a turning point where applications are critical enough, volumes are large enough, that people need fiber to the premise. And that's exciting. You're out building something, you're expanding the network, you're creating an environment of new applications. The problem is the regulations haven't kept up with that, and they create the overhang that caused the .com crash and the telecom meltdown. And what is probably different this time is you've got companies that are natural monopolies in other businesses. Every hyperscaler may not want to admit it, but they run a monopoly. And they view their investments in infrastructure two ways. One, as a way to dilute their margins, which they believe will inoculate them from antitrust actions. And two, defensively, in order to protect what they have. And that's why they are investing in AI. They have no business model. They don't know what's going to generate the revenue for each one of those trainings and inferences. And maybe the most important question to ask is the economic cost of the output that comes out, the benefit that you get from the training and the inference, equal to the cost that went into it, independent of whether or not you can capture that with your business model. And with today's power intensity and the fact that we're at the very beginning, I've seen reports that say that, we're going to train all of the data in the next 2 years and we won't need to do large language models going forward. But the average generational cycle of these models is about 4 months. So the same data can be retrained multiple times and come out with different and better answers. So we're at the beginning of needing the infrastructure, but we should think about, over the long term, what the economic benefit is going to be. My guess where we're sitting today is it'll turn out just like the internet. There are no profitable internet service providers in the world. There really aren't. There are companies that have survived by selling internet services, but they're generally less profitable than they were before. And the real winner is the consumer who's gotten all of the benefit of having a global marketplace of 5.5 billion users and the ability to publish new business models for hundreds of dollars. We're going to see the same kind of innovation with AI distributed to consumers. And yes, for employees and culture, that's really exciting. For businesses, maybe a little less exciting.
Interesting. Steve, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Dave a little, but I actually think the hyperscalers are smarter than we think they are about where the revenue is going to come from, because I think the road to human level improvement just got shorter with AI. And I think every company out there is piloting and use casing across multiple industries to some degree, certainly the big companies. I don't know if those medium to small companies can afford it. Just in our company, and we're a mid-sized company in our industry, we have probably 12 activities going on in our IT organization and probably another dozen going on in our network, where we're testing and seeing how AI tools and techniques can help us. Every CEO I talk to in the enterprise circles are doing similar things. I think the end result is once these training deployments are set up and it comes back to the metros for inference, that's when customers start interacting with each other. I saw this at Equinix, in the ecosystem concept. That's where everybody comes in to interact. My belief is that's when we'll start to see enterprises using it. And this will be like cloud. Listen, the first phase of this thing is efficiency and cost. The second phase will probably take a couple of years. It'll be personalization. You and I were talking about this beforehand. I think all the device makers today are working on AI injection of all kinds of stuff. All the hardware companies are doing the same thing. I had an interesting meeting with a founder of a very large hyperscaler this summer at a wedding. And he told me, he goes, listen, here's where I think it's all going. For your device that went from typing commands, your iPhone or whatever device you use, to touching icons, in the next 5 years is going to go to an agent where you can tell the phone what you want it to do. And that's what AI is going to enable for personalization. So I think it's going to be cost and efficiency, personalization for the next phase, and then we're going to see breakthrough. And I think, I don't know how long that's going to take, but AI is going to enable some amazing breakthrough business models that'll, I don't know, Dave probably knows better, 5-6 years out there. And this thing's going to be like cloud was, it's game changing. And I've heard people talk about this thing as possibly the fourth industrial revolution. Think about that. I mean, the 1700s was, what was it? What was gas turbines? The 1800s was electricity, and the 1900s was software computing and all this stuff. If this thing evolves to the point where the world categorizes it as the fourth industrial revolution, I think it's going to change our lives. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to, but I would suggest everybody in this room, as Dave pointed out, we should be reading and studying as much about this as you can learn right now, because it's coming at us and it's irreversible.
I'll tell you a couple examples, right? I've seen a company that has come out with products for the legal department, where previously they had 700 lawyers and paralegals, and they really only need about 25 of them. Okay. Now, people are talking about needing 40% less developers. I don't know we're quite there yet, but any industry where you already have a human in the loop, like a doctor or a coder or a lawyer, it's actually very easy to introduce agentic AI, because you can automatically put that human to be responsible for orchestrating multiple AI agents today. We're not talking tomorrow, right? So there's agentic AI is the hype amongst software people, but there's a $200+ billion IT service industry just in India, and over $1 trillion of IT service industry around the world. If you really only need 40% of the developers, think about the disruption, right? We don't know if we can get there quickly, but whoever gets there first, just imagine.
What's interesting there, as you said it, is actually AI is already embedded, AI, classic AI, as we had talked about in DC, Dave. It's already embedded. You have summarization with patient reports with doctors, where for those who might have been to your physician lately, in certain platforms, they summarize the experience. So doctors no longer have to sit there and take notes, right? They get to spend their time with the patient. or in other cases with law enforcement, or even in radiological imaging, right? Intaking, ingesting. It still requires a human to take a look at the output and assess and make sure it's the right recommendations. But it will continue, I agree, transform every element from the handset all the way through for our lives.
Yeah, one thing we used to do in financial services, early morning at 3 o'clock, the analysts would wake up, start putting daily morning reports, so it came out at 5 a.m. around the world. Right now, you can train a model for about 30 days or so, and then the next report just comes out automatically. Okay. Several banks have started doing it. Like if the Bank of England spoke for 1 hour, pretty much every analyst would sit there glued to that. Now you can just take that YouTube video, put it into an AI model, and it'll summarize for you.
That's pretty incredible. All right, so one thing I wanted to touch on is we as an industry have always tackled the digital divide, right? And what we do is a way and a path to connect those. How do you see AI playing into that, what we're doing, and what does our role continue to be to really help bridge that digital divide, help continue to ensure those who need access or should have access to AI do?
I'll just say one thing. Dave kind of alluded to it. I think the government money going in to wire up rural world, in our case, it's 40 million people that are in underserved, unserved communities that got discovered during COVID, and we're now trying to figure out how to wire them all up over the coming years with government funding, and I think that's a huge positive for all nations that are doing that. And I don't know about Dave, but we're not in the fiber to the home business, but we're helping with the backhaul and with the middle mile. That's exciting stuff, and it's pretty scary to think we have people in certain parts of our country today that have to go to the downtown library to get on the internet. Yeah. But there's I think it's 40, Dave, you probably know the numbers better than I do, 40 million people that don't live like we do every day running our lives. So that's super exciting. That money's it's in the States now with the BEAD funding, and hopefully the new administration continues to support that, and we all get to participate in that.
Well, you look at the impact of giving network to people. I think India is a great example of that, where it's one of those true examples where it sort of skipped a generation of stuff. They couldn't get the terrestrial stuff out to the whole of India because of all the villages, etc. So most people's first experience of the internet in India was mobile phone. And that has changed how these farmers work out into the villages and the rest of it. You can see the impact that's got. India is a great example of this. Get connectivity is the answer to the question, in my view.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dave, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I would divide the digital divide question into two very different components. The first is, how do we cover everybody? And the reality is, telecommunications has always required some kind of subsidization to cover rural people, typically businesses subsidize residential, and older technologies subsidize newer technologies. Those economic forces are still here. I think in most of the world, private enterprise is bridging that digital divide with the support of transfer payments. The legacy transfer payment model of USAC and USF charges is broken. It's confiscatory, it doesn't work, and it doesn't support the problem. So there needs to be a better transfer mechanism to deal with these underserved areas. But the really important digital divide question is actually the one Gary alluded to, which is the empowerment of people that don't have the economics to participate in society the way we all do. And what the internet has done is leveled that playing field. It's allowed entrepreneurs, somebody in their mother's apartment, to come up with an idea to create a new business model that turns them into a billionaire. And that level of innovation is possible because of the first wave of this equalization at the physical level. AI is going to create equalization at the application layer. AI is really software 3.0. If you think about first software, it was just manipulating data. The second iteration, which we live in today, is software that automates processes. And that tends to be relatively people intense. It used to be 3 or 4 smart guys write code. Now it's hundreds of guys write millions of lines of code. AI is changing that again. Someone else is spending those billions of dollars or trillions of dollars building that platform, and now all it takes is that smart kid to have an idea to use that platform and come up with a new idea. So what I'm really hoping is AI unlocks a different way of breaking down the digital divide.
Wonderful thought for us to almost close on. Thank you, Dave. What I'd like to ask each of the rest of you, Gary, we'll start with you and move our way back. What are your final thoughts and or predictions as we go forward into 2025?
Listen, I'm very much in Steve's camp around this. I think it's going to make a massive impact, and I don't think we should underestimate that. It already is beginning. But, these things take longer than we all think, rule number 1.
Right.
Rule number 2, we're going to have some bumps in the road, that's for sure. Are we going to have some overinvestment? Yeah, absolutely. Probably already seeing it. It can't get it right if, efficiency of capital in, or, you're spending that much money with things moving so quickly. Right. It's not all going to get spent in a smart way. But the good news for everybody in this room is that, if they're going to monetize AI in any shape or form, they've got to connect to people, they've got to do their training, they've got to do their inference, and guess how that gets done? It's called the network.
Excellent. Steve?
Oh, I think we've said it all today.
Yeah.
I think the future's bright. Let's get our sunglasses on and go after it. I think it's going to be a crazy decade plus, like we just lived through. Listen, Dave and I and Gary have been doing this a long time. I love it. I love watching people doing what they're doing and growing and having their families grow and, building value in their companies. And I think we have another opportunity to do that this next decade. It's going to be super exciting.
Fantastic. Radhika, you want to close us with your final thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is AI will not replace you, but you with AI will replace you without.
Excellent. Thank you. Please join me in thanking these amazing panelists.